And welcome back, everybody. Hands on Apologetics. We're chatting with our good friend Matt Swaim, talking about John of the Cross and evangelicals. And, that's a really fascinating story, Matt, of how, this emotionalism, this conversionism that is, there's this pressure to get people to experience the Holy Spirit, and if you don't, you fail as your job as a minister or whatever. And as a parishioner, if you don't experience it, you could feel like, well, God abandoned me. Maybe, the stuff about God isn't true or whatever. In other words, when you encounter something like the dark night of the soul, that could really cause big problems within that worldview, right?
Yeah, it certainly could, and I think that's why people latched onto it so much, because it was it's sort of an anchoring thought. It's weird when you and maybe you've had friends. Well, did you know the late Deacon Alex Jones? I think he was up in your area. He makes remarks about how sometimes when he was a Pentecostal preacher and they would have, a really powerful service, he'd come out and people said, "Well, we really had church today." I'm like, well, what were we having all those other times?
Right.
Or, I remember hearing in my own experience, the Holy Spirit really showed up at Mass the day. I'm like, where was he, on the third Sunday of the month? What was happening there? This is, also, with that desire to kind of summon the Holy Spirit, or summon at least the consoling, really the spiritual consolation of the Holy Spirit. I remember this taking place when I was at Asbury College back in the 70s. And actually, there were a few different times in the course of Asbury where they'd have a chapel service and someone would get up to the podium and start confessing their sins and people would start praying. And a few times in history, and you can actually probably there's probably stuff on Wikipedia about this, where this prayer service went for 3 or 4 days straight without a break through the night into the morning. It was an Asbury revival. There are other revivals like this that have happened in the course of especially American history, Cane Ridge revival and some others. And I remember even in my class, there were groups that would meet on the chapel steps and pray fervently, every night for an hour, that the revival would start back up, right? Trying to recrank the engine on that thing.
Yeah.
And there's a mistake that can be made in all of this, and John of the Cross actually identifies this in the Dark Night of the Soul, where he says the temptation can be that when you this isn't exactly how he phrases it, but essentially what he says is, if you have a lukewarm feeling about your faith and that upsets you, then you don't necessarily have a lukewarm faith, because people with lukewarm faith wouldn't care. Right?
Right. Yeah.
A person who's got lukewarm faith, if they have lukewarm feelings, they don't care. But a person who has strong faith and then gets lukewarm feelings, well, that really bothers them. Right? So in a sense, the fact that you're bothered by your own lukewarmness is a sign of your own hunger for God. So in a weird way, the fact that the dark night of the soul really bothers you, if it leads you to say, God, why, instead of I give up, it's actually forming you in a stronger direction. It's kind of what James says when he says in James 1:2, rejoice whenever you face trials of many kinds, because the testing of your faith develops perseverance. James, that verse is often applied to when something bad happens to you and have to deal with it, but it's also applicable to when nothing happens to you and you have to process it, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's, in a sense, not feeling anything is a trial. It's a trial that, but to be bothered by that, and if you don't have, this is why spiritual direction or sound spiritual counseling, and honestly a good theology of prayer is so important, because if you don't have anybody saying, well, this is what prayer is, and the church has 2,000 years of wisdom on this, if all you've got is your non-denominational pastor trying to help you recharge the feeling, then it's easy to just you lose your bearings and just say, well, maybe it's over. Maybe this was a phase. And a lot of, especially what you read about in the ex-evangelical movement, it's a lot of people saying, they whipped us up and we were excited and whatever. And now I look back and I realize those feelings were just like, me being manipulated.
Yeah, contrived. Yeah.
You can go back and reinterpret those through your new lens of skepticism.
Yeah. 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 Very good. So, how
actually very bad, Gary? Very bad.
No, very good point. Very bad situation, but I think you're hitting the nail on the head. Is that it's just part of human nature. You can't always be on the summits of the mountains, or if you are, you never appreciate how high up you are unless you visit the valleys.
Yeah, is it Chesterton? Anytime I can't remember who said something, I always think it's Chesterton. He says you see small things from the top of the mountain. From the bottom of the mountain, you see big things, right? When you're up there, everything looks little down there, but when you're in the valley, you see the big things, right? You see the big mountains. There was also a passage from C.S. Lewis in the Screwtape Letters that addressed this in a roundabout way. I don't think I necessarily put two and two together with the concept of the Dark Knight and this concept from Screwtape when I first encountered it. But as your listeners probably recall, Screwtape is a senior demon. He's advising a lesser demon, Wormwood, on how to destroy a Christian's life. Mm-hmm. And this Christian is going through a period of dryness. And Screwtape says, well, don't think that means you've won, right? Because, as he puts it, he says, make no mistake, our cause is never more in danger than when a human who is no longer desiring but still intending to do our enemy's will, and by enemy he means God, still intending to do God's will, looks round upon a world in which every trace of him seems to have vanished, asks why he's been forsaken, and then still obeys. Right?
Right, yeah.
And that's kind of the gift that John of the Cross gives us, in really kind of articulating this concept of the dark night of the soul. It says, obey even if you don't feel anything, because that's it kind of gives you that. It goes back to what the scriptures say over, obedience is better than sacrifice. Just do what I say. There's a level of trust that goes along with that. You're trusting God to be good and have your best interest, even when you can't see where all this is going, right? And even if you don't feel his hand upon you, you trust him based on your relationship with him to this point, that you move ahead into the darkness, which is terrifying.
It is. But it's also part of love. I mean, look at marriages. I mean, they always speak of the honeymoon years, where everything is fine and dandy. But there is times where you don't get those warm, fuzzy feelings, and you still need to continue to be who you're called to be in marriage. Regardless if you're getting all the positive feedbacks and things like that. Kind of like how we started the program. We kind of started out on that note.
Yeah. Marriage is where you're wrong about everything all the time, and you just thought you were right about everything up to this point. You thought all your ideas were good because you never bounced them off of anybody else before.
Because you always approved of them.
but this is what, as you say, this is what love is, right?
Yeah.
And if love is, in heaven, it says, Paul tells us that, the greatest of these is love. Out of faith, hope, and love, these three remain. You won't need faith in heaven, right? Because the faith will be fulfilled. Won't need hope in heaven, the hope will be fulfilled. But charity, love, will be everything, right? That's all we've got at the end of the day. As a matter of fact, it's John of the Cross who himself says that at the twilight of our lives, we'll be judged on love alone, which is just a powerful statement, but a statement from a guy who is the same guy who came up with this concept of the dark night of the soul and walked his way through it.